But it's not one word to describe it all. And I wondered what you thought, A, of the home remedies. I saw you laugh at Andrew's liver salts, but you're almost as old as me.
No, I didn't know you could still get them, to be honest.
Neither did I, till my wee brother brought them round. And just, the mint tea, the Andrew's liver salts, the bicarb, some people are having to take Imodium for 2-3 days, etc. Some people are having to take the opposite of Imodium to help. I know we've talked about it before, but I'd like to know, A, what you think about the home remedies, and B, any thoughts on, anything else that can be done. I mean, one of the ladies who contacted me decided she had late stage bowel cancer, which is fair enough. Because what people don't understand, David, is that when you're living with this progressive, incurable illness, and you're left on your own with your own thoughts, we can get a bit morbid and a bit scared.
Yes.
So over to you.
Okay. So the first thing to say is that there are kind of, with things like this, there are kind of two groups. There are problems that might be related to the PBC in a broad sense, and then there are things that are going to be unrelated to it. And it's always one of the difficulties, because it can be very easy for everybody to put X, Y, and Z down to PBC when it's not connected to it. Yeah. And GPs are often the worst at that. So talk about it to your specialist is a line that patients often hear all the time. So the first thing to say is you've got to be aware of the things that could cause nausea like that in people who haven't got PBC. And in the old days, it often used to be ulcer-like conditions. Everyone used to think that ulcer was pain, but actually it isn't. It's largely nausea. And so, if something is ongoing for a length of time, the possibility of that is there. And the right thing to do is to investigate that with an endoscopy. We do far fewer of them than we used to do, but that's the right thing to do, because, you don't want to miss an ulcer that could cause real problems. And, we don't see very much of it these days, but cancers in the stomach. So sickliness like that is one of those difficult symptoms that it almost always is a nuisance rather than a problem. But you need to just think about the possibility of a problem. So that's the sort of thing that is unrelated to PBC. You need to be aware of it. In terms of PBC related things, it's usually one of two or three things. Firstly, the disease itself can give you a bit of nausea. I think there is a word for it. And one of the patients in Newcastle came up with it. And that word is cochlea. Makes me feel cockly. Okay? And it's a northeastism. I just think it's a wonderful word, because I think, and I say to people, a lot of people say, that they end up feeling a bit cockly, and they go, yes, that's exactly it. So I'm not sure what the origin of cochlea is, but that's the word. So you can get a bit of nausea with PBC anyway, because it's a bile related disease. You can certainly get some nausea with urso, because it's a bile acid, and it therefore can irritate. But the other one is that, of course, we used to see a lot of gallstone problems, and gallstones sometimes present with nausea. So we see this frequently in the clinic, and it's one of the reasons to give people an ultrasound every couple of years, just to make sure there aren't gallstone problems developing. In terms of the remedies, that's fine. So if you're controlling symptoms, then symptom control is what you're looking for. Now that sounds kind of obvious. So whatever works in terms of controlling the symptoms is a good thing. My only concern about that is that it can sometimes mask something that's problematic. Yeah. There is something there. So don't go on too long. There's been an interesting evolution. You can now go years and years ago, drugs like omeprazole, which are the very powerful anti-ulcer drugs, had to be on prescription. You now not only get them, over the counter, you get them in supermarkets. Now those are very powerful. If you've got indigestion, they're very powerful. The problem is they can mask problems. So if it's ongoing, then it's well worth at some point getting it investigated if it's a long-term problem. And if it then settles completely with whatever, Andrews, then that's fine. So these are all fine. None of them will cause any harm, don't get me wrong. None of these are going to be problematic, but just watch out for the possibility, that that just watch out for the possibility that that you're masking something which is problematic.
That's absolutely excellent advice. Just to say, I know 2 of the people who wrote to me are actually in the room. And by the way, I forgot to welcome everybody. Welcome. But 2 people wrote to me. What I did was I just emailed my consultant, and he said to me, "Okay, we'll get you in for exactly as you said." So I think, as I've always been saying, if there's anything new and you are struggling for it to settle down, I think you should report it and let your consultant make the decisions as to how he wants to go forward, whether he wants to monitor it for a couple of weeks or put you down for an endoscopy. You probably have to wait a wee bit longer anyway, but I think it's worth reporting.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, just my analogy with all of this is that, you know, most people with a headache would take paracetamol, but if that headache isn't going away, you need to remember that the headache of meningitis will also be treated by paracetamol, and there comes a point where this is too much of a headache that's there for too long. You need to just be sure that there isn't something underlying it before you just control the symptoms. Now, everyone kind of can work that out for themselves. Everyone can work that out for themselves, you know, with headache, but it's just important to kind of remember that.
Okay. Lovely, thank you. Right, Robert, over to you.
Okay, so someone's asked, in terms of that, is there anything in relation to PBC that causes being cochlear?
Yeah, the bile acids, it's part of the disease. Right. So it's part of the disease and it's part of the treatment. So the disease can do it, and URSO can certainly do it, and it's to do with bile acids getting into the stomach. So and in some people, you know, it can really cause people not feeling like, so they don't feel like they want to eat. So yes, it can be part of the disease. It doesn't. And if that's the situation, then, you know, obviously there are some people who really struggle to take URSO with it, and in that situation, you know, you really want to try and find a way of controlling it. So I think at some point, if it's ongoing, if it's problematic, it's worth investigating it, and then you're confident that there isn't sort of problem underneath it.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Robert.
Okay, so next question then. We've gone from nausea, so let's go to feces and poo and all things glorious. So we've got somebody who for a long time is having floating poos. So they're concerned in terms of, you know, is there a fat content there? Is it an inappropriate fat content? Clinician isn't entirely sure what to do. GP is not entirely sure what to do. So I guess it's just what can you tell, and what do we need to know, and what questions should we ask next?
So floaty poos can
oh no, David frozen. No.
That's what happens when you go onto floaty poos.
So there you go. Facebook have let us off. Sort of, you know, I think they were. So yeah, it can happen in some people. If you have a lot of fibre, you know, it changes the density of poo, and you can end up with floaty poo. So that's the first thing to say. If they're very smelly, I'm sorry about this, but you know, it's what gastroenterologists talk about. If they're very smelly and floaty, then what it does is raise the possibility that you've got some fat in it, which is often what happens. And that is something that is actually very common in PBC. So essentially, to absorb fat is not water soluble. If you get some sort of fat on your clothes, you won't be able to wash it out with water. You need to use a detergent. So fat in your diet also needs a detergent. It also needs a detergent. And to be able to absorb it. And so you need 2 things to absorb fat from your diet. You need to have bile acids, which come out down from the liver, which act as a detergent. So that's what they're actually there to do, is to help you absorb fat. And then you need a thing called lipase, which is the enzyme produced by your pancreas, which breaks up the fat. So those 2 things working together, the bile acids to solubilize it and lipase to break it up, is how you absorb fat. Now, actually, both of those can be a little bit abnormal in PBC. So, but both of those can be a little bit abnormal. So obviously bile acids are abnormal in PBC. And back in the old days, we used to see a lot of this, where people struggle to absorb fat. They'd often have sort of smelly and floaty poos and would lose weight. That's a really key feature with all of this, is this is there weight loss with it? So so you can get it with PBC for that reason. Also, PBC, your pancreas can sometimes get a little dry. So in some ways, your eyes and the liver, the eyes, and the salivary glands all come from the same origin. They're all affected a little bit in PBC, although we tend not to think of them. So some people can have what we call a dry pancreas and don't produce quite enough lipase. And then the final one to think about absorbing fat is that once you've solubilized the fat, you need to have a normal bowel wall for it to get across. And celiac disease, which many people will have heard of, is also commoner in PBC than it would be in the population. So celiac disease can cause you problems absorbing fat like that. So I think the thing to say is that if it's just floating stools, then it's, and there's no weight loss, there's no anemia, there's nothing else, going on with it, then it's probably just one of those things. And, it usually, comes and goes. I think if there's some weight loss with it, or you're anemic, or, you're unwell or whatever, then it's worth investigating which of those three potential bits of the PBC jigsaw it is. And that becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of how you investigate it. But the first and most important thing to do is to make sure it's not celiac disease, which is a simple blood test these days, which the doctors can do. And then the other one is to get the form actually acts as the detergent you need to absorb fat. So it's usually nothing, but if it's got weight loss with it, just be aware of those possibilities.
Okay, thank you. Robert, microphone.
You do know that's £20 donation to charity.
It's gone up from a tenner now, so okay.
It's inflation.
So yeah,
we've got a triple lock. We've got a triple lock on the amount of money you have to pay for speaking with your microphone off.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've just set up a direct debit. I thought, you know what? Right.
Oh, there have been times I've made a prepayment into the swear box, I can tell you.
So, right, perfect. Okay, next question for you. This is an interesting one. We've got somebody who's written in. So their ELF is 10.3.
Yeah.
It was previously 9 point, I can't remember now, 9 point something.
Mm-hmm.
In between those two ELF scores, they had a FibroScan of 4.4.
Yeah.
So they're not sure what to believe, how concerned to be. What does that mean for the bigger picture in terms of ELF versus FibroScan, et cetera, et cetera? So a whole series of questions in there. So if you can just go for your classic DJ long answer, I think that would be really helpful.
When I read this question, it sounds a little bit like I'm sorry I haven't a clue joke. For those people who listen to that, the different definitions, FibroScan and ELF. A FibroScan is a non-invasive way of assessing the presence of liver cirrhosis using ultrasound technology, and ELF is a little person who sits with Santa. Just about the only hepatological joke I know. It's not renowned for it. Okay, so for those people who are not familiar with these things, ELF is a blood test that measures breakdown products of scarring. So when you scar, it isn't a thing that's permanent. It isn't a thing that is permanent. It turns over all the time. So it's a dynamic thing. It's a bit like bone remodeling. Your bones always change over time. So if the scar is being newly laid down and then it's also being broken down at the same time, you can measure those kind of breakdown products. So the more of those breakdown products there are, the more likely it is there's scarring there. That's what ELF does. And FibroScan is obviously completely different, and that uses ultrasound sort of sound waves. It sends a ping out from a probe and measures how much the ping is reflected back. And the more solid the liver is, the more comes back. So it's a bit like sonar, for submarines. So, looking for another sonar, you set a ping out, and normally none of the ping comes back. If there's another submarine there, it bounces off it and comes back. Those are both what we would call surrogate markers. Okay, so a surrogate marker is something that you can measure that is likely to predict something else that is important. Okay, so and that's part of medicine. Now, a hemoglobin measurement is a true measurement. So hemoglobin is measuring hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is what carries blood. So anemia is a low hemoglobin, so the actual test is the same as there is no surrogate. You're measuring the actual thing. The only way to actually assess the presence of fibrosis, scarring in the liver, is a liver biopsy, where you actually look at the amount of scarring. And even then, it's a challenge, because you take a very, very small part of the liver and you look at it under the microscope, and to what extent does that predict the rest of the liver? So all of these things are inexact sciences. Okay, so neither ELF nor FibroScan actually measure the amount of scarring in the liver. Okay, ELF measures the amount of scarring in the body. Okay, because it doesn't distinguish. It's a blood test. It's not from the liver. It doesn't distinguish where the scarring is coming from. And FibroScan measures how rigid the liver is. And of course, people differ from person to person. So and each of them also has its inaccuracies, and we've used all of them. And the answer is you will get, rogue and unusual results. You will have somebody having a FibroScan done on 2 separate days and get slightly different results, often, reasonably, significantly different results. Sometimes that's different observers. So the first thing to say is, for the FibroScan, when you next see the doctor, check how confident they were. So they'll put confidence limits into it all. So that's how reproducible it is. They do a range. So they'll normally do about 10 to 20 pings, and they'll get 10 to 20 values. And all of those values should be, very similar to each other, in which case you're confident about it. Sometimes they vary more. An ELF is more accurate at the level of the test, because it's done in a standardized laboratory, but it's not restricted to the liver. So my best guess with what you're describing, so if your FibroScan is low and 4.5 is low, then the liver is not rigid. I mean, by definition, it isn't. So in that's the one I would definitely go with, because that's the closest to actually assessing what's happening in the liver. So you can get ELF values going up, where you've got more in the way of scarring turnover. So if you broke your leg, you would see an ELF value go up. If you've, cut yourself and scarring, you've got scar formation in the tissue. So I think the question here is, what's the index of concern with regard to liver fibrosis? And I would always go with FibroScan. We don't use ELF, actually, because we want to know what's happening in the liver. And for us, FibroScan is the most accurate way of detecting what's happening in the liver, other than doing a liver biopsy. So I would be very pleased you've got a FibroScan value that is low, there is almost no way in which you can have a low FibroScan value without the liver not being rigid. And I would go with that. And I think you've just got to remember that all of these tests are a little bit inexact. None of them, I always say to people, we'd all love to have the machine they used to have in the Star Trek, where they'd pointed at somebody, the diagnosis was come out. Our tests aren't like that, and they are flawed. And so they always have to be interpreted in the clinical context. So none of these is a diagnostic absolute test. They are all guides to be interpreted in the context of everything else that's going on.
Excellent.
So for me, in the paper, stone and scissors of all of this, FibroScan would be ELF.
Okay. And ELF is very expensive, of course.
Yeah, so I mean, ELF is very expensive. The issue, of course, is the cost comes in very different ways. So once you've bought a FibroScan machine, it's incredibly cheap, and that means you use it regularly, and therefore people get experience with it, and therefore we use it on a sequential basis.
Yeah.
Because the cost of the machine, once the machine.
Oh, still there, David?
So what you don't do with FibroScan is kind of ration it because of the cost, because if you've made the investment, you've got it. And then ELF, one of the dangers is you don't end up doing it, or you end up doing it in people where you kind of know the answer already, so I actually prefer FibroScan because you can just do it when you need it. And actually, just so everyone knows, we tend to use FibroScan not to look for cirrhosis. We use FibroScan to look for not cirrhosis. So 9 times out of 10 we use it because we know the value is going to be very low, because we fit it into a broader context, but it will be very reassuring for the individual to know it's very low. So the main use of FibroScan is in being confident that people are low risk, so that they can go away and not be concerned until they're next seen in the clinic. And that's a very important, a lot of tests we do, in a clinic are to reassure us and you not to find something. We're often aiming to not find something, if you know what I mean.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We like.
So, if I may, a follow-up question on that. So, I guess the point at which the patient becomes concerned is probably a different point at which the clinician would become concerned. So, we've got a patient who's got a FibroScan score of 9.6, and their question is, should I be concerned? And I guess, so to differentiate between patient concern and clinician concern. And can you give us a rough guide to numbers? I know it's not an exact science, but where are your cutoff points?
Okay, so about a normal liver will be about 3 to 5, something like that. So your liver obviously has structure to it, so it's around 3 to. So somebody with a FibroScan of 4 is normal. So that's the normal consistency of the liver. The cutoff we use for cirrhosis is 18. Okay, it's a pressure measurement. So 3 to 5 is normal liver. The cutoff for cirrhosis that we use is 18. People with really advanced cirrhosis, it will often be 25, 30, something of that order. So a value of 9 to 10, a value of 9 to 10 is elevated, clearly elevated, but it is not in the range of cirrhosis. Okay. So what that would suggest to us.
Or he's frozen again.
Somebody was turned up on day 1 with PBC. They had a little bit of fibrosis. They were maybe stage 2 or 3 in the old money. We're started on URSO, and for the next 10 years, it's stayed at 9.5 because it's been stopped in its tracks by treatment, in which case it means nothing. It means it's very reassuring because, there you are, it's stable. If, however, it was 4 last year, then that value is a different concern. So what it would do is it would be a kind of amber flag to us. So it's not a red flag, it's not cirrhosis, but I would want to know that this is not part of a progressive pattern. And so actually, it doesn't mean you would manage it any differently, but I would be going back to the blood tests, I would be going back to the URSO dose, going back to the blood tests. Is there a good response to URSO? Can we tighten it up? Because, I just want to make sure that there isn't something going on. And certainly I would repeat that again in a year and just check that there is, this isn't part of a progressive pattern. At the moment, say it comes back at 12 next year and the blood tests are all fine. This is something that, at the moment, the way we, the guides for how you manage it, we very much make decisions about second-line treatment on the basis of blood tests. But in those situations, I would be thinking of bezafibrate, which is the drug that we can use more easily in that situation, because I will be concerned. But that's very unusual. Normally, the biochemistry predicts everything. So for me, a value of 9, if I just suddenly got an email from in the hospital with a value of 9, I would be straight back into the notes to find out, 1, is this a pattern that's been there for a length of time? If so, fine. And 2, what is the context in terms of biochemistry and in terms of everything else, and can we tighten up on treatment? So it is not normal. It is not worrying, but it's just a little bit of the gentlest tinkling of an alarm bell. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, and what you're also saying that actually doesn't stand alone. There's other factors that
It never does. It honestly never does. These are all tools to be, and this is why, I mean, maybe this is an argument, you know, for an old dinosaur like me, is that actually you can't manage this purely with numbers and an app.
Yeah.
I mean, you can support it, and symptoms thing you can do, but you have to, it isn't all about alkaline phosphatase and things like that. Ultimately, there is ultimately there is a feel element to it.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. Perfect. That's really helpful. Thank you. It's been a while, but can we go into COVID? We've not done COVID in ages.
What is this COVID thing people keep talking about?
So I've heard of it vaguely, but
don't ask Boris, he can't tell you.
So, okay, so a couple of questions, if I may. So the first one is now. So this has come up a couple of times. Now, Palak mentioned trials that are out there, but I've struggled to find any. But let me come to the question first, then we'll ask if you know of, are aware of any trials or clinical kind of research things. So we've got somebody who now they've had the AstraZeneca. Oh no, I don't know which one they've had. Sorry, but basically they've had vaccines, but they've not managed to create enough of an immune response. You know, their count hasn't gone up in the appropriate thing. So the question is, what does that mean?
So I just lost you in the middle of that. So they were vaccinated.
So they're vaccinated, but apparently they haven't got the immunity they were hoping for. So either the immunity wasn't successful or their numbers haven't gone up sufficiently. So
the NHS were doing a survey about this. People being vaccinated and go back and checking the immunity.
And it still keeps. So sorry, yes. So had the vaccine, but the antibodies are not detectable.
Yeah, correct. But what I'm saying is NHS, as you know, we're doing a bit of research on this, but it's not specific to PBC. Please don't think if you've got PBC, this is you alone, because lots of people who are perfectly healthy don't get the response. I'll leave you to reply, David.
Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about that, because there's a lot of oversimplification about, you know, people with and without measurable antibodies. The immune system is much more complicated than that. Yeah. So all the evidence is that the vaccine is effective in everybody, but what you can measure of an effective response is very different. It's why it's really why we don't want to get into a world where everyone has to have their antibody levels checked every week and it records on an app. It's much more complicated, and people will have heard of talk about the T-cell immunology, T-cell responses and things like that. So I think the key thing is to have the vaccine, and I think people who've had the vaccine are, you know, significantly protected against risk with it, and I wouldn't go worrying about the individual numbers. It's the nature of how you as an individual respond. Just on a COVID note, I'm reviewing a paper which is rather interesting, and I'm not sure if it stacks up or not. I need to read it a little bit more, but which argues that URSO is protective against the COVID virus infecting cells, that it blocks production of angiotensin converting enzyme, which is thought to be the target for the virus. Now, I don't think people should, you know, get overexcited about it. There's a lot of duff data around at the moment, but it's a really interesting idea that URSO may have an additional biological effect. So I don't think I would go and start somebody without PBC on URSO, but I think it's another reason to keep taking your URSO. It's interesting.
Yeah. I'd heard that about 2-3 months ago, and I didn't raise it with you until I was leaving you or one of the other hepatologists to raise it, because until I hear, you know, firsthand, there's a lot, as you say, a lot of stories going around.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, and I'm sure there'll be people who, you know, this is just a kind of, you know, off the cuff observation from our own clinical service, but we've not really had any PBC patients affected badly by COVID at all. Don't know what that means. It's good. We've not had to handle any problems, and I'm sure there will be people outside all of that. I don't know if I believe it, but I think it's potentially interesting.
We have a few, particularly with the long COVID, David. That seems to. I'm not sure how you differentiate between the PBC symptoms, the fatigue and lethargy and everything, and the long COVID. But it's rubbish. It's rotten, as you well know. And I know one, particularly one of our members, has got some lung damage. But these are just small numbers. But on that, I see there's something on the screen, Robert, about the vaccine. One of the vaccines, AstraZeneca.
Yeah. So let bear with me a second. So,
Yeah.
so I just want to come back to this question. So again, just to be absolutely clear, so even if we've got somebody here with autoimmune liver lung and final stage liver disease, but even if you are testing low for antibodies, that doesn't mean that A, your response is not good, and B, that the vaccine is not going to work.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that, and just to be absolutely clear. Thank you.
That's
okay, so there is another question with regard to.
It's from Celia. Yeah.
So somebody somewhere has heard that the AstraZeneca vaccine can lead to low platelets.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have PBC or if you already have low platelets, are you therefore at more risk? Should they be warning us? Because obviously patients are saying, I've not had that warning, etc., etc.
But this is important, Robert, because this lady's in Edinburgh and she's been told by her GP. Now, this is the first I've ever heard of this, so I'd be very interested in your response to that, David.
Yes. So what you're getting with the vaccine is very rarely a thing called thrombotic thrombocytopenia. Okay, and basically, the platelets are all clumping together into a clot, and you can't then measure them. Okay, so the platelets, in a sense, are disappearing out from the free circulation to be measured into a blood test into the clot. So low platelets with the AstraZeneca vaccine is very rare, and all of these things are very rare. We've been through this, but it is a consequence to the vaccine. So if somebody has a low platelet count to start with, that's not related to it. So it is not low platelets are a risk for the vaccine. The vaccine can be a risk for low platelets, but it isn't the low platelets that's the risk factor. It's the reason why it's low. So there is no concern about somebody. There is no concern about somebody with a low platelet count having the AstraZeneca vaccine. If the platelet count falls after the vaccine, then that's more of a reason to.
Oh, he's gone again. Okay.
Happy
to come back. Are you back, David?
Yeah, no, sorry, just internet. We've had this before. The university, everyone goes online to America for their meetings about 2:00, and so it always crashes about 2:00 in the afternoon. Either that or they're watching the sort of cute cat. They're watching the cute cat videos on YouTube. On that note, actually, I know this is slightly off the topic, but I need to show you a photograph of. I shall do it on my phone. But there you go. Those are the newest additions to the Jones family.
Oh wow! What are they called?
Well, she's called Luna. And she's got 4 gorgeous kittens.
Wow!
They're the latest addition. Not everyone in the Jones family followed social isolation during lockdown, I can tell you. So we now have 4 very naughty kittens. So there you go. That's such a thought.
It's a lovely experience. My cat had 4 kittens.
They're at the stage of walking along, wobbling over. Anyway, sorry. What were we talking about? What we were talking about the vaccines. Yeah. So So if the platelet count drops after the vaccine, then that potentially, is a cause of concern. But it's what we call a consumptive phenomenon, where the platelets are being used up. I suspect, I have no insight into this, but I suspect that the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to sort of gradually fade away from being used. I suspect that will be the case because for several reasons. One is that there is this question mark. The other is it's not as easy to adapt it to future variants. So the Robert, you've gone downstairs or something. So the Pfizer vaccine. Because of the way it's constructed, it's very easy to. It's very.
He's downstairs, by the way. He's on his ground floor.
It's very easy. It's very easy to plug in a slightly different version. So the future is going to be so everyone makes the comparison with flu, and it's completely different. So flu vaccines are basically, killed viruses. And each year they work out the flu that happened in Australia, because that's where the flu season starts and rolls around the hemispheres. And they just make a different brew based on the viruses that they heat and activate as part of it. It's not terribly scientific. For the Pfizer vaccine, it is the genetic code of the capsule spike protein of the virus. And so you can change that. So as these variants come along, they can change or add in additional components to it. So each year we'll get a booster, and each year that booster will take account of the more recent variants. And I don't think any of us should be remotely bothered about that for the future. And there'll be a constant chase against the variants, because that's how viruses work. But over time, remember, all viruses become less pathogenic, so they become milder. So this will gradually become, and there's an awful lot of scaremongering going on, but I can tell you in the Northeast, there's one patient in hospital with COVID. And I think it's very, and we need to be very cautious about percentage increases, because if you've got another patient, that will be 100% increase, which sounds quite scary, but going from 1 to 2 is less scary. So we just need to be very careful to get it into perspective. I think at the moment, certainly, in the UK, of all the people who die in a day, about 0.01% of them will die of COVID. So 99.9% of the people dying in the UK today will die of something else. It's very important that we don't throw away good clinical care for the 99.9% of people.
Well, it was also pointed out to me by a senior microbiologist the other day. She says we are testing more in terms of children in schools and work and all the rest of it. So these numbers will seem as if they're higher, but we are looking for it. So as you say, David, it's really important not to take fight over this.
Just for a second. I mean, just imagine we didn't have COVID tests. All we knew was whether people were dying with the COVID illness. Okay. So imagine we hadn't got the genetic tests and all of that. All you knew is all that we'd had up until this point, which is simply to know the impact of people in hospital. And you would then turn around and say a disease that is killing 0.01% of the people who die in a day, about 1,400 people die a day in the UK. We would say it was a spectacular success, and that this disease is completely under control. And it's only because of our sort of obsessional testing, if you like, that it gives us a different set of numbers. But the reality is, are people being admitted to hospital? Are people being admitted to critical care? And are people dying? And the answer is, to a greater extent, no, no, and no. And I think nothing's changed on that in the last few weeks.
Could you just mention that to number 10 for us, Professor? Moving on. Hopeful as ever.
So, okay.
No comment.
Question for you. So we've got somebody who has hepatic encephalopathy, and that brings its own challenges.
Yeah.
But their question is, how can I get my test results that I haven't had? They're saying throughout diagnosis with PBC. So they're going to have a telephone consultation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to widen this up as well, because we've had lots of people. So, you know about the app, you know about self-management, you know about all of these things, and you're a huge advocate of that, but not every clinician is. So sometimes patients will go in and say, can I see my results? And they go, don't you worry, your pretty little head, they're okay, or they're stable, or, this kind of thing. So what can patients do?
Go let me answer that, David. Go let me answer that. I'll tell you what you can do.
Yeah, go on.
Put it in writing.
Yeah.
End of. Put it in writing. Email, write. End of. They won't ignore you.
I mean, I'm gobsmacked by that attitude. So you're absolutely right. I'm an enormous fan of self-management, because owning the problem. I wish one day we could cure this disease and make it go away, but we can't. And so therefore it's a case of living with it and managing it. And to manage it, you need to know what's going on with it. And actually, who's the person with the greatest vested interest in the management? It's you. I find that attitude a bit 19th century, if I'm honest. That you have no right. It reminds me, I did see a 1950s consent form that was stuck in the back of somebody's notes once from years back, and the consent form for an operation said, "I consent to an operation, the nature of which will be determined by my surgeon." And we laugh at that, but we have moved on from that. There is a thing called renal patient view, okay, and this is the future. We've tried to develop a similar thing in PBC, and for a variety of reasons it hasn't happened yet. But renal patient view is a national system. All the renal units, kidney disease units, are signed up to. So you go to the clinic, and then that evening you can log on to the system and access your results, because all your results will be uploaded into this system, okay? And you can then add comments, and it's a portal to communicate and things like that. And it's about owning exactly. And of course, the renal people, particularly on dialysis, are very much in control of what they need and when they need it. And if they can do it, why can't our people do it? So we would send everybody their results. So we send everybody a copy of the letters as a routine. And I think you, as Collette says, you ask, you can say, thank you very much for your slightly paternalistic view. And I'm reassured that you're so reassured, but could I possibly have my results? And it would be a very dogmatic clinician. I think if they genuinely refuse to send the results, then just go and talk to the pals in the hospital and just say, I don't want to cause a fuss, I don't want to be difficult, but all my fellow PBC Foundation members are getting their results, and I'd quite like to have mine, and I've asked, and would you ask for me? And you'll find that goes away, because it's all of a sudden going to end up in a complaint. And I think that's the way to do it. Everyone has it's your data, you have a right to do it. I mean, every so often we get these very strange emails from the hospital, managers saying somebody's requested sight of the notes. Are you happy to grant access to the notes? And the answer is, why are you asking me? Of course I am. There's nothing I would put in anybody's notes that I wouldn't want somebody to see. I send all the letters, we send all the results. The days of people writing rude things in notes are gone. The only thing I might want to do is to sit down with somebody and explain things if there's technical terms and stuff with it, because that can scare people. So there's nothing, you shouldn't be putting things in letters, or there's no test that a PBC patient could have done in our clinic I wouldn't be happy for them to get the result at the same time as we got it. It doesn't work like that. We don't get suddenly really screamingly abnormal tests. So I think you ask nicely, and then you ask nicely again. If you're not getting anywhere, the PALS system in the hospital is the right way to do it. That's patient advice and liaison service, and they act as a broker between you and the clinician, and it's a way of stopping complaints. You just want your tests, you don't want to put a complaint in about it. You just want your tests. You're entitled to them, and I've said you should be able to get them, and everybody else in the PBC Foundation does, so why can't? And they'll make that go away for you.
Jean, let us know how you get on when you do that. Let us know, okay?
Okay, perfect. So,
so that comment about the NHS app, exactly, that's the future. That's the future. I mean, I think that's exactly as it is. And I think it's our job, and the foundation, everybody, to contextualize results so that you know what you're looking for. Because at the end of the day, an alkaline phosphatase value, as we did with the FibroScan, for example, is it's a little bit more complicated than just a number with a range. But once you know that, actually you can look at all of this. The other thing just with tests is the degree of abnormality which is concerning, okay? And some tests, it's kind of a linear difference, and some tests, it's an exponential difference. So alkaline phosphatase just goes up, in little increments, right? So, if normal is 130, by the time it's about 200, that's the level, on ursotherapy, that's the level at which, you're looking for a response. So it's, 130 to 260 and maybe 390, it's in that range. If you have a viral hepatitis and the ALT goes up, the upper limit of normal, the ALT is 40. That's the enzyme released from the liver. But in a viral hepatitis, it will be 40,000. Okay, because it goes up exponentially. So a value of 80 is insignificant. So You just need to be aware that different degrees of abnormality have different significance for different tests.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Again, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next question then. So can we differentiate between brain fog and Alzheimer's? Now, I'm making a jocular point here. So the person who's written this feels that they're getting on a bit at the age of 64. So Chief, you might have a response to that. That's no age at all, really. So again, just can we differentiate between the two? Please.
So the brain fog is always mild in the greater scheme of things. Okay, so brain fog is always mild. So what it is it takes the edge off people's ability to do things. Okay, so and what it can do, it can affect ability to work if you're busy doing complex calculations and things, and it can you can find that you've sat through an hour of a Harry Potter film, although everybody sits through an Harry Potter film, can't work out what's going on, but you can sit through an hour of a film and realize you haven't really been paying attention. It's that sort of thing. So it's irritating, it can impact on quality of life, but it's not a profound thing. So that's the first thing to say, is that if people have got real memory problems, then it's more of a concern. So for example, one of the things that would worry clinicians about an Alzheimer's type of situation is putting a kettle on and letting it boil dry, or leaving food in the oven and forgetting that you've done it, setting out to go shopping and then forgetting to go to the shop. So the distinction would be a PBC brain fog would be going to the shop and coming home and realize you forgot to get something you were just trying to remember. Alzheimer's would be you forgot to go to the shop. So it's a degree difference, although both of them are with cognitive cognitive differences. I think one of the questions, so that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that PBC brain fog does not become is not associated with a risk of Alzheimer's. So that's very important to say. This is not a prelude. This is not a prelude to something worse. It is what it is, and it's a nuisance. So I think if somebody, but of course, as you say, it becomes quite difficult because somebody of a certain age where you might be concerned about that, then you need to think about it. So I think it's the scale that would concern me. Okay, if it's something that people around you are noticing rather than just you noticing it, that's another thing that you might be concerned about. And I think, if in doubt, there are memory clinics in all hospitals now, and I think it's a good thing to go and do that and be formally tested for it. So it's usually not an issue, but and so in a sense, it's more of a theoretical, issue. Can you distinguish the two? Yes, you can, but you can see where the concern is. But the brain fog does not lead to Alzheimer's. It's not the same thing at all. So I think it's scale. I think it's the nature of it, and it's the context of it. But it's again one of those things that's quite difficult. But it's never a problem. Actually, in our experience, Alzheimer's is very unusual indeed in PBC patients. So we see very, very few people with that, despite the age distribution of people we see.
Okay.
I think that's right. And I would add to what Robert was saying, although he was being cheeky, I'm 65 now. And, you do get a bit forgetful and you do get a bit of this brain fog. But also, I mean, half an hour before I come up here, my husband's a couple of years older than me and he's been working flat out. He's almost got burnout. Where are the lemons? They're in the fridge. And he swore by they weren't. And they were. And I think you've got to go and appreciate I nearly killed them, what's going on around you. But also, for me, I practice movement as medicine, but I think we need to give our brains a bit of exercise as well.
Yeah.
I love to do these code words. You get 3 letters and then you've got to finish it all off. I haven't had the time to do that. And when I was on holiday, I had a wee tumble to myself, be getting stressed and tired, and whose fault is it? It's mine. absolutely mine. So do some of what you enjoy, whether it's jigsaws or crosswords or code words or Sudoku or anything that tests you, or reading. I mean, I love books, Robert will tell you. I lived my life for books, and I can't tell you the last time I wrote
I agree with that. We live our lives at 100 miles an hour in this country.
Yeah.
I think it, just simple things like tiredness.
Yeah.
And also, simple things is we all have cues to what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
So we all have cues. So one of the things that we all do is we cue into it all. So my cat I showed you that's just had the kittens, she can work out when it's a Saturday morning because we get family bacon sandwiches on a Saturday morning. The cat knows by our behavior, she's cued into a behavior pattern that is bacon sandwiches are there and she can nick some bacon. One of the things that's happened with lockdown is that we've all ended in days that just blur into each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want 5 days at work and then 2 days at the weekend and then 5 days at work, that rhythm that recurs if you're just doing the same thing every single day. And it's one of the problems with holidays. It's all very well having a holiday at home, but what do you do? I mean, what do I do? Straight out comes the computer, okay? Straight out answering emails. So actually I end up doing a sort of shortened version of what I do every other day, which is a mixture of work and other things. And we need to have the loss of pattern. It's one of the soft torture forms used in the 1970s by despicable regimes was to break up rhythms of days. They would shorten days and lengthen them, and it's we all need to have a bit more structure, and I think therefore have routines and things like that help people with it. It's not a way of remembering things, but your brain likes order.
Yeah, and there's an accounting term, R&R, a bit of repair and renewal.
Yeah,
and not feeling bad if you've got 10 things to do in the day and you've only done 5 or 6. That's absolutely fine. Just I think there's a kind of mood across the country, David, with COVID. People are a bit more angst than what they've ever been known. They've had their freedoms taken away, and I just think people are on a wee bit of a different level. But a wee bit self-care and do something what you want to do, something you like to do, something you enjoy doing. And for you, you're not sharing it with everybody else. It's for you. Try it out and let us know how you get on.
My sense is that people are getting a bit frazzled now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people are a bit frazzled now.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to go a little bit just at 3 because I've got another call today. But when the SAS training, when they're selecting people for the SAS, one of the things that they do is they get them to run up the mountain, the Brecon Beacons, and then run down, and then they're due to be picked up by the truck to go back to the base. And as they run to the truck drives off, and it's another 5 miles. Okay. Yeah. But they see the truck and then they drive off. And that's what breaks the weak people, because they can cope with it as long as they can encapsulate what they're doing. But there is no reserve to adapt to a situation which hits you hard. And I think that's a problem that we're all facing is that, you don't have to extrapolate too far to work out what I'm saying.
Yeah. Have we got time to quickly answer Jen's question here on the AMA?
So the question is, so somebody is AMA negative.
Yes.
Can you become AMA positive during the course of the disease? Does everybody do so? We've heard of people that have been AMA positive, but then after years on or so become AMA negative. So can you I know you've got to go, but can you just say a little about AMA and PBC, please?
Yes. So AMA 95. So AMA's unusually useful as an antibody test. 95% of people with AMA have PBC, and 95% of people with PBC have AMA. Okay. AMA does not cause PBC, so if you take it out of the circulation, it doesn't treat the PBC. It's a marker of what's going on. 5% of people at any one time with PBC on a liver biopsy don't have it, but they will usually have one of the other autoantibodies, which are some of the anti-nuclear antibodies are a little bit rarer, and those are equivalent. So one of those antibodies or AMA is equal in terms of making the diagnosis. After you've diagnosed PBC, the antibody pattern doesn't have any relevance. So it doesn't really matter if the level goes up or the level goes down, because it's not associated with the disease process. It's a trigger point, if you like. And once you've crossed that point, we would never measure, autoantibodies again. There is no need to, because you've reached the diagnosis. So it will come and go in some people, but if it goes, I'm afraid it doesn't mean the PBC's gone away. If it goes up in level, it doesn't mean that the PBC has got worse. It is a marker for the presence of the disease. But you do get about 5% of people who are MA negative, and they usually stay like that. I mean, but clearly occasionally they can convert to it, but it doesn't have any significance. But the anti-nuclear antibodies are one of the things that people get confused about, because they are quite unusual ones. You get anti-nuclear antibodies of a different type in autoimmune hepatitis, and this often foxes GPs because you need to look at the pattern of those. So AMA is very useful to a broad approximation. If you've got AMA, you've got PBC, or you are in pre-PBC. If you're AMA positive with normal LFTs, not on URSO, we recommend you get your bloods checked every year. And if you develop abnormal liver bloods, then we would start people on URSO at that point. We would not tend to treat people with URSO if their liver blood tests are normal, unless they've got symptoms. And in our local practice, if you've got itch or brain fog or fatigue and you're AMA positive, we tend to treat those individuals because you have another clinical feature suggested. It's just genuinely just AMA we watch.
Okay. We're kind of running out of time
one
here.
One thing about AMA is that you will, if you have a liver transplant, you will be AMA. You will continue to be AMA positive afterwards. Okay?
Interesting.
So there's no association with rejection or recurrence or anything. Everybody will remain AMA positive after a transplant.
Excellent. It's good people are. David, I'll see you Saturday morning for bacon sandwiches. Thank you very much.
Not if the cat gets there first.
Thank you very, very much.
And I'm sorry, it's
I know you've got another meeting. Sorry?
I'm sorry it's a shorter session, but I can't tell you what. I can't tell you what this next call is about, but it is a completely new approach to therapy for brain fog. Okay, so I think on balance, you would probably be quite keen for me to. This is a trial. This is a trial that we're hoping to launch in a few months' time. Okay.
Right.
Excellent. David, thank you as always. It's always been entertaining. See you soon. Take care, everybody.
Okay,
thank
everybody.
you. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope we got through all your questions. Robert, I know you've got another call. See you soon. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your questions. There are a couple left, but we'll take them over.
Promise we will.
We'll see you soon. All right.
Thanks, Rob.
For now.
Bye. Thanks, Rob.